We are on Chapter 23, Section 2. This is Revolution Brings Reform and Terror. Looking at our objectives this week, we have 4. First one, explain how the National Assembly changed France's government. Second, summarize the positions of the 3 factions that tried to govern France. Explain how war and the king's execution affected the revolution. And the last, describe the events and the aftermath of the Reign of Terror. It all starts with the National Assembly. Now, if you don't remember, the National Assembly is sort of that large room where representatives from all over the country are to meet and discuss what is happening with France as a country. The same National Assembly, the representatives, mostly from the Third Estate, they come out with a Declaration of Rights. This is called the Rights of Man. Now, this is modeled after the American Declaration of Independence. And their slogan is liberty, equality, and fraternity. What this means is that every man has the right to having freedom, being equal with everyone else, and sort of a brothership together. That's what fraternity means. Now, we should note, though, that this does not include everyone's rights. So even though it's talking about equality, one woman was writing about the rights of women, and she was sort of denied her right. This was Olympe de Gouges. So Olympe de Gouges was a female writing about how women should also gain equality and freedom. And the way that the National Assembly reacted is she was seen as an enemy of the state and was executed. She was killed for her belief. The next thing the National Assembly attacks is the church. Now remember, in France, many people were Catholic at this time, not Protestant. So the National Assembly, they decide to take over and make the church state-controlled. That means that the government will control matters of the church. The main reason of why they want to control the church is for an economic reason. If we remember, the First Estate is the clergy. There's 10% of the land is owned by the church. So what the National Assembly believes is that if they were to seize control of the church's land, they could sell it off and pay for the huge amount of debt that the French monarchs had left. They also are turning the clergy into public officials. So what this means is the clergy no longer answers to the Pope, but is going to answer to people in the government. This is, even though this is sort of an enlightened ideal, it forms in the same line as Enlightenment, many of these peasants who are not necessarily educated, but who are very devout Catholics, it sort of alarms them, it sort of sparks them, and it makes them angry. Peasants felt that they were not really being listened to, and that the church should stay separate from state and government control. So the National Assembly, after they did this, they sort of were backtracking. They were trying to rebuild sort of trust with the peasants, as the peasants took up a majority of the population in France. Louis, now we're going back to Louis XVI, he is very worried. So he is still in France at this time, and he sort of tries to escape France. This escape leads to, of course, many people being more upset, and it's not looking good for Louis XVI. By 1791, we have the start of a new constitution in France. Now, this constitution, we still have Louis being the monarch or the king. But in the constitution, it's going to severely limit Louis's power. So basically, the king is reduced to having no power at all, except for enforcing laws. Also in the new constitution, we have a new thing called the Legislative Assembly. Now, this is an assembly or a body of people that is in control of making or passing laws. They are also in control of whether or not the country should or should not go to war. Louis did not necessarily want to sign this constitution, but he really had no choice. He is basically giving up all his power. Within this legislative assembly, though, we start to have some of the major problems in France coming out again, and the way that people agree about them is different. So we have three factions splitting up in the legislative assembly. We have the radicals, who believe that France still needs a huge revolution to change how France is governed. We have moderates. Moderates is in the middle. They basically are not necessarily for limited monarchy, but are not for a whole revolution. And then we have conservatives. Conservatives actually want a limited monarchy. They believe that France doesn't need that much changing. It just needs maybe a few laws to pass in order to fix some of these problems. Okay? Outside of the Legislative Assembly, we also have more factions developing. We have the émigrés, which are the nobles who have already fled the country. These people want to have the old regime back. They want to have those 3 estates. And of course, they want no taxation as the rich landowners. Opposing to that is the sans-culottes. The sans-culottes are the lower class. They want to see more change from the revolution. Now, the sans-culottes, they didn't have a say in the legislative assembly, but they are making their voices known in a different way. They're using the streets. Now, because of what is happening in France, this makes the rest of Europe very, very nervous. If we remember, most of Europe is still absolute monarchy, especially when we look at Austria and Prussia. When they see France and see that many of the peasants and working class, middle class, are revolting against the absolute monarch and are trying to form their sort of new government, they are urging the Legislative Assembly to put Louis back in charge as an absolute monarch. France and the Legislative Assembly, they decide that there's no way that would happen, and they declare war. Now, Prussia, they are starting to advance on Paris. And again, they're demanding that they put Louis in as absolute monarch. They are also saying that if the royal family is harmed, that Prussia is not going to be very happy. The Parisian mob, they sort of react very badly to this. Now, Parisian means people from Paris. Parisian, they end up mobbing jails, the jails of the royal family. They kill tons of royal guards, and they end up taking the Louis and Marie Antoinette into their custody. We also have mobs break into prisons. They kill over 1,000 people who they believe are royal or are supporting Louis and Marie Antoinette. Because of the pressure of this mob, the Legislative Assembly, they have no choice but to say that the king is no longer a king. So Louis is now taken of his title. They also have to dissolve the assembly. There's a national convention that takes office in September, and this is what forms a new government called the French Republic. So now France is officially a democratic country. They no longer have a king. Then we have this radical group. They believe in further revolution in France, the Jacobins. Now the Jacobins, they end up taking control and gaining support. They were a radical political organization, and they also sort of wrote a newspaper at this time. Now the leader of the Jacobins was Jean-Paul Marat. Jean-Paul was writing in his newspaper about how anyone who supported the king should be killed. And so after a close vote, we have the king himself, King Louis XVI, who is already no longer the king and is already a prisoner. He is put on trial for treason against the French Constitution, and he is found guilty. So Louis XVI ends up becoming beheaded by a machine we call the guillotine. Now we have a picture of the guillotine right here. Here we have is sort of a very visual image of the beheading of Louis XVI. Here is Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was also beheaded with her husband. So we have sort of a sketch drawing of Marie Antoinette waiting to be beheaded. Again, we have sort of the guillotine in the background and sort of a depiction of this beheading. So while there's sort of revolution happening in France, France is also fighting against the Prussian and Austrian armies. Now, surprisingly, the French army wins against the Prussian and the Austrians. But by 1793, we have many other European countries are joining. We have Britain, Spain, Holland. They are also joining against France. As a sort of last, and actually France starts to lose many of these battles against Britain, Spain, and Holland. As sort of a last call, the National Convention, they order a draft. So a draft is anyone over the age of 18, you have to go into the army. This also includes some women. Some women are actually fighting in the army as well. So what's happening now is we have divisions in France while France is sort of fighting against everyone else. Not everyone necessarily agreed with this revolution. Some people only wanted to slightly change the law or have limited monarchy. So we're going to start to see a division. This is the Terror grips France. We have sort of a major player in the French Revolution coming out. This is Robespierre. He ends up assuming control. So after Marthe ends up being killed or assassinated, the new Jacobin leader is Maximilien Robespierre. And he actually rules France for a year. But Robespierre, he rules France as a dictator. So he's not necessarily listening very well to what the people want. This begins with what we call is the Reign of Terror. During Robespierre's rule, he basically is killing anyone who is going to get in his way. So anyone who opposes the French Revolution, they are going to be killed, okay? Thousands of people died during the Reign of Terror, including, as we said before, any former allies of France, as well as anyone as well as Marie Antoinette. 85% of those who died during the Reign of Terror are middle or lower class. So while France starts as trying to overthrow absolute monarchy, most of the people who were killed during the Reign of Terror are actually from what we would have seen as the Third Estate. We sort of see a funny shift here. The whole idea of the French Revolution was started because of the Third Estate, those poor people, and now they're the ones being killed. Here is sort of a depiction. So here we sort of see Robespierre, and he's sitting writing out a document while there's a whole table of beheaded people sitting right next to him. They're trying to poke fun at the fact that so many people are being beheaded for really no reason at all. Okay, so again, we see many, many heads. Now, through all the Reign of Terror, they're using the guillotine. That is this new weapon that easily cuts off heads. Here we have sort of a depiction of a monster. So the end of terror. So finally, in July 1794, we have another change in the French government. So Robespierre, he ends up being arrested, and he ends up being killed by the guillotine, the very instrument that he has killed so many people with. The terror results in public opinion shifting away from radicals, so people no longer believe in the radical idea. And a new constitution is written under moderate leaders. Your question, what events led to the Reign of Terror in France?